Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Good morning, Darwin.
Good morning to you, ANITA, and welcome to November.
Welcome to November. I am sitting with this huge book in front of me. I know you want to talk about something else, but I want to thank you for this book. I have my copy in my house right on the coffee table, and I have to make sure nobody walks away with it. They all want to read it.
Well, I'm honored that I was able to write about Hugh Hefner, such a great cultural figure, and I'm amazed. I'm the only of all the people in America. I was the only one who did that.
It is amazing, but you know what I'm amazed at? I don't know how you can produce these books so quickly with all the information that you have. I am spellbound by you.
The trick is 27 hours a day.
That's right.
ANITA, I want to talk to you about two remarkable people, a man and a woman who lived in different parts of the world, and both of them have just departed to Jupiter, but they lived a century on this planet. And first, on a very lighter note, I met a woman who's creating a lot of human interest stories at a fundraiser in Manhattan. Her name is Gertrude Mogatov, and she died on October 24th. She was 100 years old, and at the age of 71 in Middleton, New York, she decided to run for mayor, and she was elected 2 terms. What was remarkable about that is Middleton was always a Republican stronghold, and but now what's creating so much interest in her is her late-in-life wedding. She had been born in Brooklyn in 1918, which was the end of World War I. And at 21, she married Dr. Reuben Mokotov, a cardiologist in Manhattan. They moved to Middletown, where he opened an office, and she taught biology. And their union lasted 61 years, but when he died in 2002. But she had entered politics in 1990. And then over the years, she kept in shape. She started working out in the gym, and she met a man, Alvin Mann, who was 4 years younger than she was, and she called him the Kid. And they began to date in their 90s, and they shared a love of opera. And one night, he drove her into Manhattan to attend the Met. They were presenting Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro. And on the way back to Middleton, she decided he was never going to propose to her, so she proposed marriage to him. And he accepted. He was 94, and she was 98. And her daughter, 71 years old, was maid of honor. And his son, also 71, was the best man. And the reporter said, oh, my God, I'll put in the story that you're almost 99 years old. And she lectured him. She said, don't print that. I'm only 98. What's the point of rushing me into old age? And now Gertrude, whom I found was charming, she's gone on her way. Her husband survives her, and along with 9 grandchildren and her 6 great-grandchildren. And she just had a final advice. She says, it's never too late to fall in love.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Love that too, right? That's a wonderful thing. I love that. That's a good title of a book, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And now on a very different subject, and this is a historical figure I got to interview. His name is Joachim Ronberg. He's called the man who prevented Hitler from dropping the atomic bomb. Now, he came only a few days from making it to a century, but he died in Norway on October 22nd, 2018. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about this man. Some people are calling him the last great hero of World War II. And, you know, there are not many of those left. If so, they would be sort of getting on in age these days.
Okay.
But he when I did my book for Frommer on Norway, the editor, Simon & Schuster, she wanted me to do a section called Famous Norwegians. And, of course, most of them were dead because they were historical figures. But I had read a lot about Ronberg. In fact, I'm doing a book now, as I told you, on Kirk Douglas. And one of my favorite films he did was called The Heroes of Telemark, which I resaw recently. And it was released in 1965. And it was about these remarkable commandos who raided the heavy water plant where the Nazis were developing heavy water to be sent to Germany to develop an atomic bomb. In fact, Hitler was working on an atomic bomb before the Manhattan Project in America. In fact, I got an interview. The tourist office set up an interview. I visited him at Ålesund, a lovely little town on the fjords in Norway, which I'd recommended in the Frommer Guide. And at first they didn't think he would receive me, but finally he said he'll see you between 7 and 8. And we ended up talking until nearly dawn because, as I've told you before, I was a World War II buff. And he said, if we hadn't raided that heavily guarded power plant, London might have become Hiroshima, or God forbid, New York would have become. Oh yeah, he was a remarkable man, and I saw him several times later, and up until the very end, he was brilliantly sharp. His body had begun to become weaker, but his mind was very sharp. And he told me this remarkable story. The British in 1942, they knew about this plant in Norway. It was in the province of Telemark. And they knew what Hitler was up to. They even knew what heavy water was at that time. And however, they tried a commando raid and bombing, but it turned out the heavy water was buried way in the basement and was bomb-proof. And so they rounded up Mr. Ronberg, who was 23 years old. Now, it was an impossible mission, and the men were given cyanide pills because some of the British commandos had been captured, and they were tortured in the most inhumane and brutal way. And so the Norwegian commandos were told death would be better than torture. I know this sounds really gruesome, but it was a turning point in the war. Now, Mr. Ronberg told me that it was just one of those wild chances, like trying to win $1 million in Las Vegas, not bloody likely. And so they were prepared to die. And there were, he said, like 99 things to prevent them from 9 men from getting into this heavily guarded compound. And he said it was just one of those. He said maybe God was on our side. Everything went perfectly. And they raided the plant and put explosive in cylinders to go down into the basement. And they fled as the whole plant went up in bombs. It was amazing.
Was this well known?
Well, yes, it wasn't known until after the war. But, like the Kirk Douglas film and some documentaries and everything, except Mr. Ronberg told me they didn't really know what they were doing. I mean, they didn't know the importance of what they were doing until the bombing of Hiroshima. And then, of course, they realized what a great role they had played in World War II. I asked him, I said, how did you, I said there were 2,800 guards there. How did 9 guys manage? And by the way, they all got out alive. And he said, we had skis on, and we skied 280 miles into neutral Sweden. 280 miles with 2,800 Nazi soldiers. I mean, that's incredible.
It is. What an incredible story. I mean, and I haven't heard the story. I'm sorry. Why don't they make a movie about it?
Yes, well, I hope they re-release Kirk Douglas's movie, The Heroes of Telemark, because it's a story that needs to be retold again. Now,
right, because I don't remember that, actually. I thought maybe they need to make a new movie.
Yeah, I think this would be very, very appropriate. It's a great story. And then Ronberg ended the war by going and he went back to Norway, joined the resistance, blew up bridges, and did everything possible to get the Nazis out of his country. And I viewed him as a great, great hero. There's a postscript to this, another coincidence on my part. The British began bombing because they hadn't had time to build the basement facilities. And one raid, the British sent 143 B-7 bombers, and they dropped us 711 bombs on the plant. And finally, Hitler decided to abandon Norway and ship all the remaining heavy water back to Germany. And so he took a ferry boat. They put the heavy water on a ferry boat leaving from Norway, headed for Jutland in Denmark, where they would transport it by train into Germany. And on the way, Norwegian resistance blew up the ferry boat and the last of the heavy water. Now, here's where my coincidence came in. The Ecuadorian government, many years ago, invited Danforth Prince, who is your friend and my publisher, on a trip to the Galapagos Islands of Charles Darwin fame.
Yes.
My namesake, Mr. Darwin. And, on cruises, you're often seated next to people you share tables with them. And a German couple, an older German couple, a man and his wife sat down, and he said, "I'm glad that you're not British." And I said, why is that? And he said, "The British arrested me in Cairo in 1945. And I said, "What did they charge you with?" And he said, "Crimes against humanity." I gulped on my coffee, and then he told me, he said, I had worked for Goebbels doing in UFA, the propaganda movie-making company outside Berlin. But I was sent in early 1944 to become the captain of that ferry boat taking the heavy water from Norway to Denmark for shipment to Germany. I said, "I know that story. I had read so much about it." He said, "I survived. I ended up with a life preserver floating in icy waters, but I survived, but the heavy water didn't." And so Hitler never got the atomic bomb, which means all New Yorkers Londoners can be grateful for that. And but you people with that Manhattan Project bombed Japan. So I thought, what an unusual coincidence.
Yeah, but he was not. Oh, he was a friend of Germany. So I guess, how does he feel now?
He was a Nazi.
I know.
Yeah, a Nazi.
And he felt free to talk to you about it, huh?
Well, yeah, this was many years later. I mean, actually, I was surprised that he was so open about it. Most people, I've met many Nazis in my life because I used to do books on Austria and Germany. And, when I started doing the books, many Nazis were still alive.
Right.
And also, I was in Paraguay one time, and I found 12 German banks on one street in this city in Paraguay. So, and then, many hung out in Argentina.
Right.
Remember Eichmann?
Yeah.
So,
My.
But this one, he just surprised me by the openness of. He didn't run any concentration camps, but he, for some reason, was selected to get the heavy water out. So he he was a kind of footnote to history. Anyway,
And when you were talking about that, of course, Bill flew those B-17s, but I don't know exactly. Who knows if he were one of his
well,
planes? You never know.
I knew that Bill, your former husband, did that. And in fact, that's why I put in the B-17.
Oh, that's why, to make me feel happy, right?
I had read that, well, we don't know all the bombing missions he
Right.
may have been on, but that was certainly one of them, and a very remarkable one.
Right.
In just a few minutes that we have left, I also, as I said, most of the Norwegian, Eric the Red, all those people were dead, but I got to interview one final Norwegian hero, and you may know him. He was Thor Heyerdahl. Now, he was the man who sailed the famous Kon-Tiki.
Yes, I do know the name. Right.
Remember the Kon-Tiki?
Right.
And it came out in a movie. I remember I was a little boy on Flagler Street in Miami. I hope there's still a Flagler Street.
There is, and I know Flagler Street is where the Olympia Theater is.
Yes, I used to go there all the time, but not at the Olympia, but at another theater, the Kon-Tiki. I was a little boy, thrilled with the adventure of it all, and I rushed to see Kon-Tiki and found the longest line I'd ever seen on Flagler lined up to see this movie.
No, the longer line is when I went to see Elvis Presley at the Olympia Theater.
Yes, I remember that. And Heyerdahl was like a big blonde Viking type, sort of like remember Stuart Granger, the movie star?
Right.
Yeah, he reminded me, and he agreed to see me between 7 and 8 p.m., but we ended up talking to dawn. Now, he was the brave explorer who took the balsa raft across 5,000 miles. He headed out from Peru with 5 men, and they sailed all the way to the Polynesian islands to prove that the Incas could have easily had contact with the people of the Polynesian islands. 5,000, of course, he had great trouble along the way, as depicted in the movie, and he talked about that adventure, and it was thrilling to hear him tell his version of it other than the movie. And he did prove that it was possible that the Incas and the people of Polynesia could have had contacts centuries ago. So he unraveled one of the great mysteries of history. But I have a footnote to add. Sometime later, people asked me what had happened to Mr. Heyerdahl. He was no longer in Norway. And I did some research, and I found that he was living in a small village in northwestern Italy to escape income taxes, because the income taxes in Norway are just crippling. And I wrote a story about him being a tax exile. And then a few weeks later, I got this letter from him, and he said, "Dear Mr. Porter, mind your own damn business." He said, "My personal affairs are of no concern to you. If I ever meet up with you again, I'll bash your face in."
No.
So for years, I hung that letter in my office. Well, I've been interviewing people since I was 15 years old, so I'm not. They don't necessarily like my interviews, so you have to have tough skin to be a journalist, and you know that. But I have to add, before we go off the air, a quick footnote about his death. He died in 2002 at the age of 87, and he was married at the time to a woman named Jacqueline Beer, like beer, and the stuff you drink. And the doctor told him he had brain cancer. Then he made a ghastly decision. He decided to go home, go to bed, and he refused any medication, and he would not eat anything or drink a glass of water even.
Why is that?
He said he wanted to die. And he said, lock the door and don't let anyone come into this room until I'm dead. And he lasted a few days, but I thought that was an unusual.
It is.
I never quite heard of someone dying like that.
Right.
I'm sure people have, but I just had never heard of a story. So this great explorer ended on a very odd note. But I was honored to meet two of the last remaining famous Norwegians, and I did stories on both of them. And I found one of the wonderful privileges of being a journalist like I've been these so many years. You virtually get to meet everybody in the world.
And before we have to go, I want to tell everybody, if you have not purchased, and I'm serious, the latest book by Darwin Porter and Danforth Prince called Playboy's Hugh Hefner, Empire of Skin, you will want to do this. It absolutely is. First of all, it's huge. I don't know. It's let me see how many words, maybe 500 pages.
He lived 91 years.
I know. That's okay. It's over 537 pages, but you'll also see all the other books that Darwin wrote. You'll see, there's a page on every one of the books, and it's hard to believe that Darwin Porter, this gentleman who's so nice, wrote all these books. You should be like someone's slave in the cellar downstairs, because I don't know how you get to do all this. But I'm really very impressed with this. I love it. Tell Danforth it's wonderful.
It's not in the basement. It's on the very top floor. Up above the world, up there somewhere, looking out over Manhattan.
I know,
I
but
think we're
it's
time
great.
to go now.
Yeah, it's time to go. I have to tell you, though, why I actually scheduled myself after you, because I thought, well, I'll do some talking too, but I think, why don't you just stick on a little bit, because I think what we're going to do is we'll go to a commercial break so we could stop you and then put you on again. No, he doesn't want me to do that. Okay, we're just going to keep going, and it'll just be a longer interview. So my questions, I have quite a few questions. Number one, What's the weather like there now?
Okay, well, it was a beautiful spring day yesterday, but this morning at 5 o'clock, once again, the cold winds have come down from Canada.
Okay, and the other question is, do you have a dog now?
No, I don't.
Oh, you never got another one.
I lost, but I have the most charming little Egyptian putty cat.
Oh, okay.
She's Egyptian, so I came up with the original name of call her Cleopatra.
Oh, of course. Okay, so
and
Darwin.
She acts like Cleopatra.
Okay, Darwin. So what's the next book that you're working on?
I'm doing a book called Kirk Douglas. More is never enough. And
I see that in the back. Kirk Douglas, more is never enough. You have it at the very last page.
Yes, and he's going on 103.
Is he really?
The American Film Institute, he's the last surviving male star. Olivia de Havilland is the same age. She's the last surviving female star of the golden age of Hollywood. Now, oddly enough, no one has ever done a full book on Kirk Douglas. The American Film Institute has just named him the 17th greatest star of the golden age. And it's surprising they've done books on all the other stars. Now, he did his own book, but you never can trust a star's biography. They leave out too much, right? Did you say we're going off the air now?
No. We have some time. Why don't we take another 15 minutes?
Okay, fine.
I know that you're always ready. It doesn't matter. And then I'll take 15 minutes to talk about some other things. But I wanted to, so you want to talk about Kirk Douglas, or is there some other hot topic that you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, okay. Would you say you'll do a commercial break now?
No, he said not to. He said just keep going. He said just keep going.
Well, it is very interesting. I attended several institutes of George Land, who's a brilliant scientist. He was a friend of mine. He was a great friend of the great Margaret Mead, and they were held in Honolulu. I guess nothing like a little heavy institute work and a little beach time on Waikiki.
Right.
And he was a specialist in conducting seminars on creativity in the aging. And I found that a very interesting topic.
Yeah.
His point of view was that sometimes men and women who have accumulated all this experience and hopefully made a number of mistakes that they won't, like we all do, like they won't repeat again, often have quite a lot to contribute to the world as they get older. And for example, I knew this incredible, I don't know how I got to meet all these people. Eleanor Steber, I just wrote about her, and she later on in life she had this incredible operatic soprano, became quite a legend in New York. And then when she sort of lost her voice, she had a lot of money, she could have retired, but then she started helping young opera stars as she aged, and even set up a foundation for them. And so she, even though, opera stars can't sing until they're 100, and so she turned those years into very creative things. And so George lined up many people who, like dancers, for example, dancers retire a bit early, at least most of them do, but many times they've gone on and had very creative lives. And so I found those things very important to me. And so I decided in the latter time of my life, I would tell in projects. I wrote travel books for 50 years, and now I turn out biographies because I got running around the globe. I got to meet everybody. For example, if I was doing Frommer's Rome, I heard that Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were having a wild time down in Rome. So I timed my visit to Rome so I would get there to Rome to see what was happening to poor Eddie Fisher. And so I sort of done my life like I heard also that Peter O'Toole was making the most pornographic A-list movie of all time, Caligula, in Rome, with people like not Peter O'Toole, Helen Mirren, John Gielgud. Of course, Gielgud later told me in London, he said, they didn't tell me it was a porno movie. and there were just all sorts of stories. Kirk Douglas was in town with Edward G. Robinson and Clara Trevor doing a week in another town. And so someone was shooting something in Paris or shooting. So I guess I was gathering up material for my future biographies because I often time my visits.
So how did you gain access to them, though?
Well, I'll tell you, if you become a journalist at 15, well, no, I can answer that. First, I was going to sort of dodge the question. I'll tell you how you do. You network. For example, when I went to Key West and became the bureau chief of the Miami Herald, guess what? I found out my next door neighbor was Tennessee Williams. And we struck up, a lifelong friendship. Well, just through that one contact, I got interviews with Marlon Brando, Paul Newman, later on Elizabeth Taylor. Tennessee virtually knew everybody.
Yeah, I see. You networked a lot, yeah.
And then you would meet, say, a friend of Tennessee's, and if you ingratiated yourself with them, then you got involved in their circle. I hope that's making sense.
It does. I understand that. Yes, that's very, very nice. I understand how you did this. But the one thing I have to say is, you also have a very, very nice personality. You're very friendly. You're very courteous, and you're very smart. So once they talk to you, then as you said, it was supposed to be an hour. Before you know it was 10 hours, because that's how you are. That's how I've always been with you. When we
Yeah,
came and visited you, I mean, I didn't want to ever leave because you were
of
so
course.
interesting.
Thank you, my dear. But they always didn't work out. Like, I love the music of Nat King Cole, but he told me to get lost, kid. so so they didn't always work out, but they usually did. I mean, for example, my best friend James Leo Hurley, he wrote a novel called Midnight Cowboy. You may have seen it,
Oh, sure.
and it became the best picture of 1969. Well, just through him, I met Tallulah Bankhead, my dear friend Joan Blondell, who came and lived the summer with me. She'd been married to Mike Todd before Elizabeth Taylor got him, and she had affairs with Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart. In fact, she gave me a great deal of the information for my first biography on Humphrey Bogart, because she made 53 movies for Warner Brothers. Edward G. Robinson, all those people. She said, I'm tired of being asked, what was James Cagney really like?
Yeah,
And,
that was a different time, wasn't it?
Each person in my life, not all, I mean, some told me to get lost, but each person contributed to enriching my bios, which I plan to write one day, except my job lasted till 2013.
Right.
When you take a job in 1960, you don't expect. Oh, for example, I've discussed that with Bill Finley. I worked for Senator George Smathers.
Yes, I remember that discussion.
And he took me up to Palm Beach to meet another senator from Boston, and his rather beautiful wife, and I met Jack and Jacqueline, and then he asked me what I thought about them on the way back to Miami, and I said he's much too sophisticated to become president.
Yeah,
So
that was a day, wasn't it?
Here I was, a great predictor of one's future, and then it's just. Smathers introduced me to a lot of people in New York and Washington. He lived a very long life in Florida, too. And I was hoping another subject I'm compiling we talked about him last time, on Burt Reynolds. He made it to 82. I was hoping he would make it to 100, because he had so many fascinating stories to tell. And again, what is sort of incredible, even when they do an autobiography, these stories don't appear in their books.
Well, it's interesting, though, that these people are just really, they're just human beings who happen to be fated by a lot of people who just idolize what they do. But I think that sometimes they really want to have a real life, and many of them don't get a chance to have a real life.
Yeah, because they become the victim of their own stardom. Now, speaking of that, I don't know how I'm going to get it done, but I've been promised I've got to get a book on Judy Garland out in time for the release. They're doing a film on Judy.
No, I don't know that.
Renee Zellweger, well, of course they won't use her voice. They'll use Judy's. You can't imitate Judy Garland. Well, some drag queens do, but you can't imitate Judy Garland very well. And my book is almost going to follow the precept of they don't go back to the Wizard of Oz. We know all about that.
Yes.
But my book begins when she got fired from MGM after all those years, from the set of Annie, Get Your Gun, a role that went to Betty Hutton. So. But I do have flashbacks the way the movie does. She'll suddenly remember the death of something, or she'll have an encounter with someone, or she'll meet Minnelli because they had a joint interest in their daughter, Liza Minnelli, or she'll hear that her former love of her life, Tyrone Power, died in Madrid. So the movie also has those flashbacks, because to tell the full story of Judy Garland would take 3 volumes. And as I said, you don't need to say much more about The Wizard of Oz, except one night in New York, for the rest of her life, she said the audience would scream. They mispronounced the title is not Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it's Over the Rainbow. And wherever she went, she said they were screaming out, "Sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow." And finally she said one night in New York, she was sort of fed up, and she said, "Too many damn rainbows."
Oh, that's very funny. That is really funny.
Her life had been in anything but a rainbow. It's a tragic story. And
so many of them are, though. That's the interesting part. So much talent. And so many times these stars lose the essence of their life. The very thing I think that makes them so fascinating, somehow they just get caught up and they don't keep the real essence of who they are. And that's too bad.
Yeah, that is, I've always wanted to write about one of my goddesses, Rita Hayworth. And she became a princess. She became the love goddess of the world.
Right.
And then she goes terribly downhill and suffers then Alzheimer's disease. But not only that, so many stars end up bankrupt what is it? She married Prince Charming and they lived happily ever after. I remember fairy tales as a child. That's how the ending. She married Prince Charming and lived happily ever after. But first they don't marry Prince Charming, and rarely do they live happily ever after. And I'm drawn to tragic stories. I'm not. It's not that I wouldn't like for a happy ending, but this brings up the point that I just found out about you. If someone does a story of your life, I totally agree with you in what you told a reporter, that Meryl Streep is the only woman who could play you in the movies. Do you remember telling a reporter that?
Yes.
Yeah. See, you're out there on the web. Everybody's on the web.
Yeah, everyone's on the web. Well, but I see now there's a good example. I don't know her personal story, but somehow she seems to be pretty stable with her family and all, Meryl Streep.
Yes, she does. The reason I brought her up is if someone wanted me to write the bio, of course I could do it, but I am not Meryl Streep. Her life is too orderly, too good. I think she's the most brilliant actress in the movies. But they don't do those gods and goddesses like Lana Turner and people like that anymore. And I almost need, for example, I've written a book about Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, but although I admire him greatly, I wouldn't want to write a book about Barack Obama or Jimmy Carter.
I understand. Yeah, I do understand. Although, well, I understand that, but Barack Obama probably has a pretty interesting life, even if if it isn't anything explosive. Just knowing him and his thoughts and his wife and his family, I think that would be a very interesting book. Actually,
someone has already done it. For example, I got to meet very briefly Harry S. Truman at the end of his life in Key West, where he came down for a final vacation. If you remember, that was his vacation home during when he was president. Uh-huh. And he was just, I could write a book about his political career. My God, he presided over the end of World War II. There was a lot, but I like a personal story. And I think he and Bess were just true to each other till the very end. Whereas Franklin and Eleanor, now that's a story.
Right. What a story, right? Especially, when you think about it, having the polio and, people don't dwell on that because he didn't want them to. But just imagine what that was like every day to get up and get your body into shape that you could do.
Yes.
We passed that by, but it was amazing. That takes an extraordinary person, I think, to do that. But anyway, so you know,
But how can I say this delicately? He was not paralyzed in certain areas,
I understand that,
so
but
he kept
but
his mistresses.
yeah, but he still. Let's just face it. You have to get undressed. You have to get cleaned up. You have to go to bed.
Oh
Then your
God,
legs don't
yeah,
work right. I mean, it's not easy, Darwin. You know that. You're in pretty good shape, but imagine what it was like if. How would you get up those 4 flights of stairs that you go up and all? It's people don't understand really what it is like. I did tell you that story many years ago about this woman when I lived in Minneapolis. Bill and I, lived there for about almost 2 years, and there was a woman who had polio from the time she was 9 until when I
yes.
met her, she was 30. Lived in an iron lung, Darwin.
Oh God,
I mean, I know, but yet, she was fascinating. Learned how to paint with a stick in her mouth. Learned how to type with a stick in her mouth. She learned how to
oh
breathe a frog breath so that I could take her in a reclining wheelchair downtown so she could see things. And I mean, so you talk about these stars. They have so much, and yet their bodies is in pretty good shape most of the time, and for them to not appreciate what they have is very sad when you see these other people who, just like this Darlene Moore said, I mean, she's been
see,
probably the hero in my life thinking about her.
yeah. Well, the see, I admire someone like Elizabeth Taylor. The role sort of dried up, and then she became her mobility became a great problem, and she was in a wheelchair most of the time. But I like the way she carried on, and of course, her great contribution was raising money for AIDS
Yes,
research, which
that's right.
is still killing millions of people around the world, particularly in the sub-Sahara. The Zimbabwe apparently has just more than half the population infected. I mean,
I didn't
you
know
don't
that.
hear,
I didn't know
you
that.
don't. Oh, it's still. I mean, it's being controlled in the West. I mean, people can get AIDS like Magic Johnson and still live today, and that's wonderful. But you need these treatments, and of course, in the sub-Sahara, they don't have access to all those medical facilities. So AIDS is a horrible thing, and I think Miss Dame Elizabeth. I learned you never are supposed to say Dame Elizabeth Taylor. It's just the first name, Dame Elizabeth. Uh, she carried on until the very end, and I admired her. But then someone like America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford, who was the most famous woman in the world at one time, she just took to her bed.
Mm.
So I think you face a choice of how you want
Yes.
to end your life, and I want to finish my last manuscript.
Just keep writing. Just keep writing, kiddo. You have so much still to
Before I
write.
go on my way. Well, there's so many things to write
I
about.
know.
I
It's
sort of
amazing.
I sort of wished I had now bowed out of the travel industry a long time ago and went to work. But you see, this is looking back. I mean, everybody looks back in life and say, "Oh, well, I should have done that. I should have done this." And I mean, you may not, but at least I do.
Well,
And
no, you know what, Darwin, but now I was thinking about it. So here, because of Danforth, really pushing you to do this, now you're in the Airbnb business, not because you need the money, but because you want the interesting people to come to you so you don't have to get up and travel anymore.
yes, by the way, travel is not the luxurious thing that it used to be.
Right.
I mean, I used to get on with all sorts of heavy suitcases full of stuff, and no one
Yeah.
ever checked my bag. Those days are
No.
gone, aren't they?
They're very different, but I do admire you so much, and you know that, and I do want everyone to buy your book, The Playboy's Hugh Hefner. It's and the way you would get this, of course, is you can always go to Amazon, but you can go directly to Blood Moon Productions. So it would be bloodmoonproductions.com, or is that how they could,
Yes,
just
yeah,
go
but
on the website?
Amazon has the best deal.
Oh,
They really they really cut the prices of their books,
Yeah.
amazingly. And I'm very I'm grateful for that. By the way, it's not Hefner is often associated with pornography, but this is not pornography. This
Right.
is he was a great cultural
Yes.
warrior.
Yes.
Ronald Reagan tried to put him out of business, and
Yep.
so and from the very beginning, when he put the nude of Marilyn Monroe. By the way, he borrowed $500 from his mother for the Marilyn Monroe
Is that
nude.
right?
That was the best deal
Yeah.
he ever made in
Right.
his life. And,
No, you're right.
and
And he was so much more than that. It's interesting that people like this really did have to have a higher power. He had to really believe in what he was doing and know that that it was the right thing. And when you think now about what's happened with the, gay and the lesbian and all, I mean, he was into that so many times. He didn't care. And yet, it's still.
yes, he
Yeah.
wanted freedom for
right.
all, because
Yes.
growing up in the Eisenhower era, there were, if no one was around who grew up in the Eisenhower era, it was a very restrictive time, and he wanted a very different life. He did try that, though, and one thing about him, although he's a notorious playboy, he didn't let loose until he was 24 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So a good part of his life was lived being a good boy.
yeah, he was very special. I remember going to one of the Playboy clubs in Miami Beach when they had it by the
yes,
Fontainebleau. Remember?
I think I saw you there.
Oh, you're so bad. That's right. You saw my tail. You saw my little bunny ears in my tail, right?
Yes, I did. I recognized you immediately.
All right. All the tails are the same, actually.
He did have, two clubs in. One was in Miami near Biscayne Boulevard.
Oh, he
and
had
the other
another
was-
one besides the one in Miami Beach?
Yeah, he had two, and in fact, I remember I went to the club to hear my great goddess Marlene Dietrich. I mean, you never expected Marlene to be appearing at a Playboy club on Miami Beach, but he booked in Marlene for a Lily Marlene night, and
Oh, really?
she sang. Oh, it was just packed with people. Well, Marlene Dietrich still is one of the great femme fatales of the 20th century.
Yep.
Talk about a woman I would dying to write about. Is the definitive book on, or she called it Marwena. She couldn't pronounce Marwena, but talk about a goddess. Oh my God. I don't know. Unfortunately, I am of the belief, and many people watch Turner movie classics, we just don't have movie stars like Lana Turner, Rita Hayworth, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Clark Gable. Wow. I mean, we have Meryl Streep, who's a brilliant actress, but maybe not a god and goddess like we used to have when I was growing up.
Yeah,
I went to all those.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about you and thinking about all you have, and I guess that's what we have to do. We do have to wire your brain and put it in, just that we put a recorder on your brain so that we could pick it all out and get it.
Now I'm going to tell you something that will surprise you, and I won't. This is just a little teaser. I've had to take 3 weeks off to do a special edition book for just, you've seen these special limited edition books.
Yeah, what are you telling us?
It has a great deal to do with the history. I'm doing it with the Staten Island Historical. I found out that tremendous people have come through this house over the centuries. It's 200 years old, and just amazing amount of famous people, beginning with silent pictures and everything. It's just
What do you mean? Your
like
house is 200 years
Yes.
old? I didn't realize that.
And oddly enough, the book will end with you.
Oh, you're so bad.
And I'm even. I'm not, but
Oh
our
my
friend
God.
Danforth Prince is even running that beautiful picture of you.
Oh, my God. That's how we're going to end the show. We're just about 1 minute away, and you are just so much. Oh, both of you. Anyway, well, I love this. I was so glad we could have you on longer. I never get enough of you, but thank you. Thank you.
Promise not to sue me.
Oh, yeah, right. I'm going to sue you. No, I want to come see you, not sue you.
It's very complimentary.
Oh, listen.
All right.
Whatever it is. You're so wonderful. You have enhanced my life, Bill's life. Never forget you, honey. Never.
Okay. We'll see. We'll meet again.
I hope so.
As Clark Gable said to Lana Turner, somewhere I'll find you.
Oh, I love that. I can hear the music. Oh, yeah, right.
Okay.
Thank you, sweetie. Okay, thank you. Good morning. All right, bye.